Hi, Lori. I know that it took me a really long time to finally get this, but here I am, and I want to kind of present the project that I've been working on to culminate your class. So, really quickly, on Monday of this week, had a little unfortunate accident. Ended up with this guy. It was actually at school. A desk ended up landing on my hand and breaking three of my fingers. So I've kind of been out of it the last couple of days and taken a couple of days off of school to sort of recover and go to the doctor to get this guy taken care of. But I didn't want to wait any longer to do this because I know I've just been putting this off and off. So without further ado, I'm going to kind of go through what I created for this project, which was actually sort of like a magazine. I found a really cool template and wanted to kind of be creative and to try to present this information in a cool way. So if you're listening to me, it would be helpful if you had the magazine kind of in front of you or was just looking at it on your computer as I talk. As I go through it, you can kind of follow along with what I'm talking about. Okay, so to jump in, I really enjoyed class this year. I really got a lot out of thinking critically about how to serve students, specifically students that are troubled, that have behavior issues, or have kind of had a history of unsuccess. And one thing that I really thought about a lot through this class and through just out this semester is how to get students motivated. So much goes into preparing content, making sure you're following standards, getting grades in, etc., etc. But when it really comes down to it, it's all about, are your kids going to perform? Do they want to do the work that you are creating for them? And basically what I have found, is that intrinsic motivation is an absolutely key factor to success in the classroom. So what does that mean? Well, so to start, what is intrinsic motivation? Intrinsic motivation is motivation that comes from within. It's motivation that isn't tied to external reward, and it's not tied to something that the teacher is doing. So it really just, intrinsic motivation is when you as a student say, I want to learn this material, not because my teacher wants me to, or not because my parent wants me to, because I am genuinely interested in what is being taught to me. And my desire to learn is coming from within me, not from someone else. Now, however, what I found through a lot of research and what we read a lot in class and discussed is that although intrinsic motivation comes from within and it comes from yourself, it can also be influenced by a teacher or a leader. And what I have done is I've tried to use strategies to influence intrinsic motivation in my students this past semester. So I basically use 5 different strategies to try to influence intrinsic motivation in my students. So the first thing that I did was try to build productive relationships. So how does this increase intrinsic motivation? Well, by building constructive relationships, meaning relationships that are founded on wanting my students to do well in school, showing that I care about them on a personal level, and then also that getting them to trust me. So much of their motivation comes from, okay, the teacher wants me to do something, so I have to choose whether to listen to the teacher or to not listen to the teacher. If they don't like you as a teacher, they're probably not going to do it. But if you have taken the time to build a meaningful relationship with them, they can say, you know what, I like this teacher. Or, you know what this teacher is asking me to do is not actually terrible. I trust them that even though they're asking me to do work, that my work will be worth it. And so by building productive relationships with students, it can help them kind of get over that hump if they have had maybe a bad teacher in the past they didn't trust. It makes it easier for them to say, you know what, I'm not going to worry about this potential bad relationship that I have with my teacher. I'm just going to focus on my work. So that was my first strategy. The second strategy that I use to try to get intrinsic motivation in my students is to track their mastery of goals. So what this basically looks like is when we finish a standard and we have taken a test on it, I try to present information that says you have passed or you have not passed. But I don't say it in that way. I actually say master. So you have mastered this standard or you have not mastered this standard. What I found is that a lot of students are just unorganized. They'll do something and not even realize what they have done. But if you're able to put it up on the wall for them, it makes it really easy for them to be like, oh, you know what? I did do this, and here's my proof. I did master it because I got a star that said I mastered standard 7.1 or whatever it may be. So that's kind of the second way that I tried to influence intrinsic motivation. The third way is to create student choice. So a lot of times I had found that students didn't want to do my work. Why? Because I said, this is what we're going to do. And they would say, well, why can't we do this? Or why can't we do it this way? And a lot of times it ended up being a battle. So what I kind of figured out is, hey, why don't I try to give my students a choice? You guys can do it this way, this way, this way, or another way if you have something, even a better idea. What it created was more work for me, but it also allowed my students to sort of take a hold of their own learning. A recent example. I had an essay recently where I created 8 characters, gave them background information, and had my students read them over. It was their job then to pick some of those characters and develop a story around them. Then they were also able to add in their own characters. So many students got so excited because they read my characters, found 1 or 2 that they liked, and then also said, hey, can I add this character that can be in their friend group? Or these 2 people want to be fighting crime. Can I add this villain that would help them or create a villain for this story? And so many students just wrote more than I'd ever seen them write because they were excited and they felt like they were allowed to be creative on their own and it wasn't just me telling them what they had to write about. So to go along with this, my 4th strategy was to allow creativity. So like I just said, that was obviously allowing creativity, giving students the ability to add to their own characters. But it's also being creative by varying the types of assessments that I give, incorporating projects, allowing outside research. I want my students to be able to see that I'm a creative person, and the way that the world works is sometimes you get inspired to do something, and you want to do research on it, and you are literally interested so much that you don't really care what's going on around it. You want to know information. So I've actually taken times in class where someone's asked me a question or someone's had a really good statement, and I've actually gone on the computer in front of my students and looked it up or found more information about it. It shows them that, you know what, learning doesn't just happen in this way that maybe they've been taught their whole lives, where it's like a teacher tells you something and then a student has to regurgitate it. Learning happens when if you get inspired by something, you got to pursue it. You got to ask the right questions, then immediately find the answers. And allowing this and showing my students this really just kind of shows that, you know, knowledge and learning doesn't stop in the classroom. This is something that you will do forever. And being creative, being inspired, trying to learn, putting in your best is something that you can always do. So that was the 4th strategy, allowing creativity in my classroom that I try to influence intrinsic motivation. So the final strategy to influence intrinsic motivation in my students that I try to use this semester was to be a model. So what does this mean? Well, students are always watching their teachers. It takes me acting appropriately. It takes me showing that I'm not just doing this because it's my job. It takes me saying, you know what, I am motivated to help you. And by me being motivated to help you, you should be motivated to do this work. It really helps when students are not able to say, well, you're not even doing this. If you're able to kind of walk your talk and to act the way that you want them to act, say the things that you want them to say, it makes them much more trusting environment, and it also will allow students that opportunity so that they can be motivated on their own to get their work done to the best of their ability. The last thing I want to just mention is specific feedback. So although specific feedback doesn't necessarily create intrinsic motivation, I do think that it aids in the process. And here's why. When you give specific feedback, you're telling a student, here's what you did wrong, and here's what you can do better. It gives them sort of finite steps of ways that they can improve. Some students who maybe want to get better at a subject just don't know what they need to get better at. Maybe there's just too many things, and so they get overwhelmed. If you're able to give specific feedback, then students can set more measurable goals for themselves and say, if I can just get this, then I'll be this much closer to mastery, this much closer to success. So those are all the strategies that I try to use in my classroom this year to influence intrinsic motivation. And I really tried to use these strategies after reflecting on how my first semester went, and then also all the different things that we discussed this year in this class and also some of the other classes at Marion. I've really had a very successful classroom probably over the last 5 weeks because we've gotten into a good rhythm, and some of these strategies actually really did work. The different way that I've been presenting information to my students, they've just really jumped and been excited about the ability to be creative and to have choice, and to really just write about what they want to write about. So the last thing I want to do is just talk about some of the learning outcomes. So the way that I kind of interpreted what these learning outcomes was, so what would happen if students, were able to be intrinsically motivated? How would that, or if they were able to understand what intrinsic motivation was, how would that help them in the classroom? So if students were able to understand what intrinsic motivation is, they would be able to understand what motivates them, meaning what things they need to have in order to do the best. Whether that means they need to have a quiet space, whether that means that they need to have a teacher who's going to give external rewards. So you can be intrinsically motivated, I think, if you know that, I want to get this, but I know it's also going to help me if my teacher says that at the end of this, I will get something, because it'll help me stay focused. So in addition to that, students will be able to set and achieve goals. When students are intrinsically motivated and they understand what it is, they're able to set measurable and specific goals. A lot of times I have students brainstorm about what they want to be when they grow up, or what they want to do in their future, what they want to do in 2 years, 3 years. And they don't know because they haven't done it, and it's really hard for them to come up with specific goals. But if they're able to come up with weekly goals or monthly goals, smaller goals, then those goals will add up to long-term success. So, and finally, if students are able to understand what intrinsic motivation is, they can pursue learning outside the classroom. I had mentioned this earlier, but learning doesn't stop in the classroom. In fact, true learning, life, comes outside of the classroom. Kids are going to spend the majority of their lives not in a classroom. If I'm able to give them the skills and to show them that this doesn't happen, that learning isn't only in this classroom, then they're going to be able to be more successful in their lives. If they can be intrinsically motivated to learn without a teacher guiding them, then they're going to be successful. So those are the 3 learning outcomes that I wanted to mention in this project. So the last thing that I just want to say, just in regards to all of this, is that students are why we teach. There's so much that goes into being a teacher, and there's so much extra thing, and it's really easy to get sidetracked and to not think about why you're in the classroom. But the reason that I come to work every day, the reason that any good teacher, I think, should come to work, is to inspire students. Because in the end, if we can inspire students and set them on a track to success, no matter what kind of attitude students give us or the amount of extra busy work, that makes it worth it. When students are truly changed for the better by a teacher action, it really does make going to work every day something worth doing. So thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. Once again, I really do apologize that it took me so long to do this. I really enjoyed all the different research that I had to do going into this, and also participating in this class throughout this semester. Thanks, and have a great day. Bye-bye.